Welcome to week 2 of 3520. If you've worked with me before, you know that I try to provide verbal feedback when my schedule allows me to do so. And since we're just getting started, I have that time. I'm going to try to keep this to under 10 minutes. I know your time is precious, but I do have some things that I want to address in the very first week of class. So first of all, thank you for your submissions. I appreciate you doing your surveys and your introductions. I know you have to do this kind of information for all your classes, and it can get tedious, but it is important for me to have contact information and to sort of know where you're headed and what your goals are when I'm designing the class. And I would encourage you to take time to read each other's introductions. What I might try to do if I have some spare time before the class ends is make a table of all your reading suggestions and share that with you. So I first wanted to talk to you about your KWL as an activity. Beers suggests, and you'll get to this later, that KWLs as other strategies are useful to engage students in what they're about to read or a future activity. And so I was wondering, when you went through this process, did you think it made you curious about what we might be learning? Did it give you some excitement? Were there any aspects of it that were difficult? What would you have changed to make it easier or simpler for students or for yourself? I made a suggestion that you might want to move across the rows directly. So if you have had a what do I know, then you'd have a what do I want to know that was connected to it. And the reason I did that, made the suggestion, it wasn't imperative, is because if you ask people what do you want to know and they don't know a lot about the topic, it's difficult. If somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, what would you like to know about calculus?" I would have no way of answering other than maybe to know what calculus is. And so having saying things like, well, what do you know about calculus? Well, I know it's a type of math. I know it's a higher level math. Allows me to then form some questions based on my prior knowledge. And so I find that to be the most successful way to work with KWLs, and I wanted to give you that experience. But think about that as an activity and whether it worked for you, and if not, what would have made it work for you. And we'll revisit your KWLs later in the course. Let me address your class, your 7th grade class, and your discussion posts. So your strengths as a class, you guys as a class, not the 7th grade class, is that you guys really thought about grouping. So you looked at this class and you noticed some similarities and some differences and some ways that you might attack that aspect of the class. I might organize them in certain ways, or you might have said that you might separate certain students. And that's great planning. And you also really thought about the student interests. And so that stood out for you. And that makes sense that that would stand out for you. It's also an easy thing to grasp onto. And that it looked like you were planning ahead for future assignments. Like, what would I do if? And I could really see that, and I appreciate those. So things that I'd like the class to focus on for your next discussion post is that I really need you to reference the texts that you've read often. Many of you referenced the article. I don't know if anybody referenced the beers. I'm not going to say nobody did because there might have been one or two of you, but it was not a common occurrence. And the reason that we have these posts, or I have these posts, we're doing these posts, is so that I can see if you've read the articles and the chapters and if you can understand them and then apply them either to a question or to a task. And if you're not referencing them, I have no idea if you're just using prior knowledge, or if you didn't understand something. And so please reference the texts consistently throughout your discussion posts. And then I wanted to say that if the 500 words is not enough to address your discussion points fully with details, tell me. We can add, I can make the range instead of 350 to 500, we can do 500 to 700. The reason there's even a word suggestion is so I don't get 2,000 word posts and I don't get 100 word posts. 500 seemed like a reasonable number as far as, previous classes. And then something that I noticed that you guys talked about a lot was the diversity of the class or the uniqueness of the class. And some of you were talking about the uniqueness of the students. Some of you might have been talking about the uniqueness of the class. And I just wanted to let you know that based on my 7th grade teaching experience in an inclusion classroom, that's a very common class makeup. You might not have that experience if you've worked in different counties or if you're working in resource rooms, but you're going to find students with ADHD, students who are on the spectrum, students who have emotional behavioral disorders, students who have learning disabilities, students who are gifted and may not qualify for gifted services, but definitely have gifted traits, students of regular intelligence, students who have family difficulties. That's all going to be in the same class, and often it can be within 2 to 3 students. And so the diversity was purposeful, but it's also, in my opinion, representative of experiences that I've had in the classroom. So we've talked about the word length. Due dates are always Sundays by midnight and Tuesdays by midnight. If I've made a mistake in the assignment sheet and listed, which I am prone to do, and listed a different day, you're welcome to clarify with me, but I've started adding the dates to the calendars. So if you see something where you think it's due on Sunday, but I put a Saturday date, then assume it's Sunday unless I tell you otherwise. I'll be very specific if it changes. It's probably just that I put the wrong date. For week 2, what I want you to keep in mind, and I won't need to go over what we're doing for very long, but as we get used to the course, and since this is an online course and you don't get to hear me sort of talk through upcoming assignments, you're reading chapters 2 and 3 and the picture article. And what I wanted to go ahead and point out about the picture article is it's about a survey that's called the Motivation to Read survey. And the survey provides questions that teachers can ask either as a whole survey or just in part, and then responses, that what they've learned from responses. And one of the most interesting things to me that I learned was that students often think of reading as a they think of reading as something that they do in school. And so students might say, I hate reading. And then in the same survey, they say, I go home and read a graphic novel every day for an hour. And so when you talk to the students about them, or when these researchers did, they found that students just didn't like what they considered to be school reading, but they liked reading things that were of interest to them. And I think that knowing that information can guide you in your conversations with students. You're going to read a lot about assessing student needs, and there's a really great chart on page 28. You're going to learn about dependent versus independent readers, and I meant to put readers there, not motivation. And this part should not be new information to you. And then you're also going to read about good readers and bad readers. And when you read that, I would like you to think about how you might use those words in the classroom, good reader, bad reader, and what kind of effect it might have. If you have a poster that says good readers do, what kind of effect would you expect that to have on your students? For your discussion post, you have 3 topics you could write about. Please do not write about all 3. You cannot do that referencing the texts and showing me that you understand what you're reading and can apply it to a discussion question if you talk about all 3. You're grouped by first name, so your writing will go in the discussion post grouped by your first name, and your post, as I was just saying, should be substantive, should synthesize, you should have quotes, it should be organized. Look at the rubric. And for your response, you need to provide a suggestion to a fellow student in your group and support it. So that suggestion could be something that you feel like they just barely touched on or that they missed. You're not criticizing it, you're teaching your fellow students. And I think that's a good skill for you guys to be working on because you're teachers. If you have any questions, please do contact me. Many of you have already, and you know I'm always willing to answer your emails or texts if you have questions. And of course, check the syllabus first or post your question in the discussion post if you would like, if it's something that's broader and not specific to you. And I'm sorry I went over my 10 minutes. Have a good week, and I look forward to reading what you've got for week 2, what you post for week 2.